staying focused on this group of players that are still on the team before we look ahead or anything, are there any players that might concern, and may concern not be a word, but you could potentially see transferring, and for Houston losing that way? We know that Reggie Chaney will not return. We know Marcus Sasser's not going to return. We know now that Jarvis Walker's not going to return. Jamal Shead and Ramon Walker, they're kind of in that. They'll probably go through the draft process and get that feedback, but any other player that potentially we might not see again in a Houston uniform.
Yeah, who was that? You had cut out for a second.
No, just in general, is there any players that you could potentially see, whether we know that Marcus Sasser, Chaney, and Jarvis are gone. We know that it's likely that Shed and Mark will go through the NBA draft process. Mm-hmm. Any other players that potentially with the transfer portal could transfer out? Or
I mean, of course, no speculation here, just the way that the trend is from what we see from college basketball. I'm sure you will agree to this, is Ramon Walker. I mean, typically in this day and age in college basketball, when players see their role diminish and their playing time diminish, normally they look to go elsewhere. And so if he does go elsewhere, I wish him nothing but the best. But in my opinion, I think he could have helped this year's team even more than what Terrence Arsenal. No knock on Terrence. If y'all watch previous shows, y'all will see how big I am on Terrence Arsenal. But just giving my opinion strictly on the floor and what Ramon was able to do last year, and then what I think he could have did this year. He can be a really good defender. He's a big body that can finish inside, and he can knock down threes. He isn't a best three-point shooter, but neither is Terrence in his freshman year. So I think he could have had made just a same clip of shots from the outside. But if he does come back, I think he should be able to compete for some starting time. I mean, you look at the guards, they're going to lose with Marcus, and so just competing in practice. And I think it's a great coaching job by Sampson to insert Emmanuel into, because early in the year he wasn't getting no playing time. I think it was smart for him to insert Emmanuel in this year's team because they needed someone that could stretch the floor. And so right. Ramon, if he does come back or if he leaves, I think he should. I think he will be able to have a successful college career. If he does transfer, I would love to see him in the Big 12 and go against Houston, in any big conference, man, because I love his size. I love his intangibles. Every time Ramon was on the floor, you know he was going to take a charge. He was in the right place at the right time. He's going to rebound. And so he has a lot of intangible things that he can bring to the floor. And I don't think he was able to put his offensive arsenal on display in Houston because, like I said, Coach Sampson really gives you a role. You must start in that role in order to keep getting minutes. And so I love Ramon's game. And I wish him nothing but the best, but hopefully he does come back in Houston. And I think he can help Houston, especially if I don't know who's going to be the backup point guard if Jamal comes back. Will it be Tremont or will it be, I can't remember the kid's first name, Wilson? Malik Wilson or transfer. But let's just generally say if they don't bring in another guard, Jamal goes out, Tremont goes to that ball handler role. I think there's room for Ramon on this team and to have an impact, but we shall see. What about you? What's your thoughts?
No, that's that's the player that comes to mind definitely when it comes to potentially could transfer out. And again, this is just us throwing it. It's not with any like, oh, this is gonna happen. This is just going off the riff and speaking. But I think exactly, and I think what you mentioned, he kind of became that identity player his freshman season because he was the player that was going to go in there, and even if he didn't score a single point, he was going to fight for rebounds, and like you said, he was going to draw charges at least once a game and probably multiple times. I think Malik Wilson, he's an interesting player because he redshirted. He transferred last season, didn't play a single minute this year. So we don't necessarily know what kind of he brings to the table. That's going to be interesting in and of itself to see what that kind of guard lineup is. Terrence is going to be there. Emmanuel Sharp is going to be there. Jamal Shead will be there. Tremont Mark will be there. Ramon Walker will be there. Malik Wilson will be there. Cordell Jefferson, who's going to be a new freshman coming in. I mean, he's coming in as a guard. He's listed as a guard. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of position he plays with Houston. And heck, if they end up bringing someone from the transfer portal, I don't think it just keep Cordell Jefferson out because he's coming in as a freshman. But if you look at it, Shead, Mark, Sharp, Arsenault, Walker, and Wilson. That's 6 guards right there. And if I'm being honest, I find it hard to believe all 6 will still be on the team come June 1st for Houston. That's just my opinion because there's so much. And again,
players want to play.
Exactly. There's so many bodies, not as many minutes for everyone. And again, that's something that Houston kind of missed when Jamal Shead would grow out. That true playmaker. Now, Ramon Walker, like you hit it before, he did grow in that area. He's shown that he's able to play make, especially off pick and roll situations. But maybe have a bona fide pass first player could be interesting to see if Houston what they go out to add in the transfer portal. But that's going to be something to keep an eye on. And again, that's a good problem to have when you have so much depth at specific positions.
It is, and I think just transitioning from the guards to the post, because Houston bringing in primarily post players. Outside of Cordell Jefferson, they're bringing in post players because these last 2 years they're losing. First last year you lost Josh Carter, Fabian. Now you're going to lose Jarris and Reggie. And so you're going to be young in the front court. Javier Francis is still going to be there. J1, of course, is coming back. And then you had Cedric. Is his last name Lath? Is that how you pronounce it?
It's pronounced Lot, like Lot, but it's
Lot.
L-A-T-H.
Okay, Lot. Man, I seen him in person for the first time. He's a big body kid. So I'm excited to see his game and how he's developed. Then you got Jojo Tugler coming in. And what's the other freshman that we signed at center?
It's Jojo Tugler, and then it's Jacob McFarland from Rancho Verde, California.
Yeah, and so you're bringing in a ton of post players who have a lot of size, and so the front court is something I'm going to keep my eye on going into next year and see will he bring in anyone with more experience, primarily in the post. Because you mentioned the guards, and the guards will be young outside of Tremont and Jamal, and they have experience. Will be young, and Wilson as well. He won't be young. He's had played 2 different colleges and has college basketball experience. And so I want to see what's the way that Coach Sampson approaches his post and how they will look to play. And I think JVA, just starting with, let's start with J1. He's the most experienced post player. What do you foresee his role being next year? And what do you think about the season that he has and where he can develop into going into his last year?
I think with Juwan, I think you'll see him kind of move more. I guess technically, it was so strange starting Jarris and Juwan because technically, I guess Jarris was the one that was playing center, but really they didn't have a true center on the floor at all times. I think, again, with the influx of big men that are going to be coming in next year, Javier Francis, who's going to have a year under his belt, he potentially could slide in to that role or again, potentially bringing someone in from the transfer portal. I think Juwan solidifies himself as being that starting four for Houston, and there's going to be some bigger body next to him playing 5, whether that's Javier Francis or if that's another player, whether it's a freshman or someone that they potentially had from the transfer portal. I think that'll be interesting. But I think that also allows Juwan Roberts to have a much more comfort level, might not be the right word, but again, he has a year of experience being a starter. He's going to be much more well-rounded, and I think he'll certainly be much more consistent. I think if you're looking at something from improvement from Juwan's point of view, to be able to have consistent, whether it be a go-to post move that night in and night out, they can kind of have that option because, again, that's something that hurt him. Miami, they tried to go to Javier Francis in the post. They tried to go to Juwan in the post, and they just weren't able to hurt them. There weren't a go-to post option, and then it really hurt them once Miami caught fire because it wasn't really a countermeasure. Houston kind of tried to match them three-point shot for three-point shot, and they just couldn't do it.
Yeah, and one word that stood out to me and what I was thinking about was consistency with J1. He's consistent on the defensive end and with rebounding, but he has to become more consistent on the offensive end. And I will say, I'm sure, and I heard him speak about it after the game, that he was unhappy with his game against Miami. He was, and rightfully so. I think he definitely could play better and should have played better. But in addition to that, I think he has to get a little bit more stronger, because you look at how strong Miami's post player was. Then I'm thinking about last year to Villanova, the post player that they had. They were both really strong, girthy guys, in which Juwan has the quickness ability on them to out jump them and get to rebounds quicker. But I think, like you just said, I think he has to become more consistent offensively and have a go-to post move. He's a left-hand player, and he looks to get over his right-hand shoulder to his left hand, and he does a great job of getting to his left hand. And he's one of those post players who can turn right, put his shoulder into you, create space to get to his left hand. So he's kind of unorthodox post player. And so I really like that. But throughout practice, you always see him practicing his jump shot, but in the game, he never shoots it. So I'm looking forward to him next year. Will he take that next step and start shooting his mid-range, maybe start shooting some corner threes, but his leadership, his culture-ness, that's not a word, but I'm creating his culture-ness in regards to Houston. I think you can't put into words what it means. He already talked about after the Miami game how Houston's going to have a lot of young players in the post, and he's looking forward to mentoring them and helping them grow. And so I just think, just for his game, speaking in general, his game, he just has to become more consistent offensive player, because he's going to be dependent on next year to be produced offensively.
That's a great point about the jump shooting that he always does. I mean, he did it consistently after every practice this year. He was working with Kellen Sampson and Jamal Walker, and they would just take turns shooting from mid-range to outside shot spots as well. So that's certainly going to be an area to keep an eye on in terms of Juwan Roberts' development. And absolutely, I agree 100% when it comes to that leadership standpoint. It's going to be, he was in the same room with all those years with Fabian White. He was with Josh Carlton a season ago. Now it's his turn to kind of be that lone senior, that lone veteran in there as well. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on from that leadership standpoint. And then on the topic of Javier Francis, it'll be interesting to see him and how he develops. Now, he showed what he did show flashes of is that he's a rebounding monster, and he could be a potential defensive lockdown. If that's probably not the right phrase to say it, but he has the capability, he has the assets to be able to be a really, really good defender in the paint. Now, when it comes to offense, I think that's going to be interesting to see how he develops, because in the minutes that he did play this season, it did seem like they were very limited when it came to any offensive go-to moves.
100%. I think, like I mentioned with Juwan, he's another player who has to get stronger. I think his lift and his activity on the defensive end, I think we'll see that take a next step. And I think it'll make Houston an even more better defensive team. Because you saw what Jarrett showed late in the season as far as shot blocking, and Juwan even showed his ability to block shots. I think Houston probably will be in the top nation in block shots when Javier plays a full amount of minutes. But offensively is where I want to see his growth. He's shown throughout games to where he has great hands. He can catch any pass. He can finish left hand, right hand, jump hooks. But now it's just about seeing him play for a full stretch of minutes, because last year he wasn't really allowed to play through mistakes. He made a couple of mistakes in a row. It's come on right out because you had players who were in front of him. And so next year, I just want to see his game on a full starter's minutes. I want to see him, how he produced on the full starter minutes, because I can't really give an analysis on his offensive game. I could give my opinion on what he showed in flashes, but it really wasn't a lot of minutes for him to really, really display what he could do. He did show flashes of being able to be a really, really good player and have a huge upside. Now it's just about getting that experience and being able to do what he can do for a full 40 minutes.
Most definitely, at the very least, have a consistent set role where he knows game in and game out, I'm going to get, this certain amount of minutes. Could be interesting to see kind of that next development process for him. Now, we've kind of touched on everything. Looking ahead, it'll be interesting to see what the new crop of freshmen bring to the table. I think the one that certainly stands out above all else, and it's because he's already been on the roster, and Dayon, you alluded to, you saw him in person for the first time this past Friday in Kansas City, and he's built. He's not only is he tall, but he is built. It's crazy to think that he's only 18 years old, that you wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at him from a distance. But I think Cedric Law is going to be a very, very interesting, maybe wild card, because he'll be a freshman, but he does have those extra months under his belt. And we saw what Emmanuel Sharp was able to do for Houston, even though he was a freshman. But certainly those 6 extra months in the Houston system helped them to be prepared come June and into the season. One of the things that we haven't really even considered or taken into factor this summer, Houston will have the luxury of being able to go on an overseas trip. So that could be something that helps them out as well.
Yeah, it definitely could, because I think the last time I did it was Marcus' freshman year when Quentin had just joined the program, and so not only will it help them in bonding, but the competition that they'll play over there, I think it definitely helped them. But yeah, Cedric, man, we talked about Miami's post player and then Villanova's post player. He has that type of size, that type of strength, that type of girth. And so, like you said, and I think I heard Coach Sampson even refer to him that he started playing basketball late. He said he wasn't a high recruit. He saw him playing, and I'm quoting, I'm phrasing Coach Sampson, not word for word, and that he saw Cedric play, and he just stood out to him how hard he played. He played the hardest in the game that Coach Sampson watched. His body, his size, and I just want to see him. I haven't seen Houston have this size of a player since they had Breon Brady. He has Breon Brady's size, but he's taller. But he's taller, and so I can't wait to see how he develops for sure.
Definitely, but that's going to pretty much wrap up this past 2022-23 season of the Houston Cougars. Obviously, we'll keep you covered as news progresses when it comes to Walker, Sesser, and anything else relating to the men's basketball team. But to really put a final bow on it, 2022-23, a season that had a lot of really, I don't know if you want to say expectation, but it certainly had a lot of storyline component to it just because of the Final Four and where it was in Houston. We saw after the game the official Twitter account, the official social media accounts, something that Kelvin Sampson wrote on the whiteboard in Kansas City, 33-4. That's their overall record that they had. They accomplished, like I said at the top, they accomplished winning the American Athletic Conference regular season title one more time as they head to the Big 12. What's kind of the biggest thing you'll remember about this team? And that could be a bit of a loaded question.
Wow, that's a great question I haven't thought about. I think the biggest thing that I remember about this team is they're resilient. I think this was a really, really resilient team. And really, Coach Sampson's a resilient program, and they've been resilient, especially over the last 2 years. But just sticking with this team, I think their resilience and their togetherness. I mean, that's an understatement because they always seem together, but it seemed from afar that this team really, really liked each other. They really, really just gelled well. And so I don't think they underachieved. And I think they all pushed each other to become better. And Coach Sampson always referencing being a player-led team. But you would see oftentimes where whether it's Jamal, whether it's Reggie, whether it's Marcus, or whoever the player, they would be encouraging each other in different moments, whether it be a bad moment or a good moment, to, hey, I trust in you, keep going. And so that's one of the things that I remember about this team. What about you?
That togetherness is exactly what I was thinking. So I'll change the word. I'll say family atmosphere. And the reason why I was going to say that is because after the game in the locker room, and Dayon, you were there too, so you got to see the emotion that was on the faces of the players still. And that had been at least 20 minutes after the game when they finally let reporters in, and you could just tell in the way that the players, certainly when they weren't being interviewed, they just kind of seemed to be in awe, really, that the season had come to an end. And that's the thing. You heard Jarvis Walker say it. They got so close so quickly. Reggie Chaney said that the message that both he and Sasser kind of reiterated to the team was that, the biggest message was that they all love each other, and whatever happens from here on out, a lot of players are going to go a lot of their own ways, but Reggie in particular said you can always reach out to me and he'll be there for the team. So that's certainly a key word. And again, going back to that family type of atmosphere that they created, it's something that a lot of teams under Kelvin Sampson, that's a big word that the players will use. But I think with this iteration in particular, you could see it much more definitely, even just from an outside perspective. And I think the other thing, again, you kind of, even though the expectation was, oh, the Final Four is in Houston, they played with those expectations from the beginning. They were top 5 in the Associated Press and whatever polls you want to put all year long. And even when they lost to Alabama, when they lost to Temple, and even that loss to Memphis in the championship game, they always seemed to be able to kind of quickly put that behind them and just continue to live up to those expectations, which is not something that's easy to do, especially look at what happened in North Carolina. They were number 1 preseason and they didn't even make the NCAA tournament. So having those expectations, it's not every team that can not only live with those expectations, but continue to play at that high level, which is something that really it's going to stand out about this team.
Man, I agree with every word you said. And another quote that I want to mention that Juwan said, he was in reference to Jairus. He was like, man, that's my brother. And of course, I wish him nothing but the best, but I can't wait to even spend even more time with him in the future. And so it just like that. I mean, that's a great example of their relationship, the bond that they built. Jairus even had more reporters asked him about moments that he missed or that he would cherish with the team. And I think he was referencing Juwan. I think they may have had a flat or had some type of trouble and they walked at night just on campus or somewhere in Houston. I think he was saying they were on campus. So just those little moments that we don't even know about that players will hold on to and build that bond going forward.
Yeah, definitely. They asked him a story about Marcus Sasser, and he said that one day the car broke down and they had to walk across campus. So it was definitely again just how close they were able to get.